Hey guys, Roland Harmio again with Safe Financial with one of the more important topics to cover regarding retirement. So, understanding sequence of returns risk, what retirees and pre-retirees need to know and understand well ahead of retirement. So, to better understand this concept, let's start with the very basic things. Average rate of return, the difference between accumulation and distribution phase. So first thing, average rate of return. So average rate of return is the acceptable measure of a portfolio's performance overall or over a time period. So usually measured in yearly basis, so annually. And then over time, so let's say in a period of 15 years, what's the average rate of return? So most portfolios, whether it's a 401k, a stock account, or a TSP if you're a federal employee, the performance of that portfolio is measured in numbers, right? It's in a percentage number. So let's say it's 4% annual rate of return over the last 6 years, or something to that effect, right? Um, Secondly, understanding the difference between accumulation phase and the distribution phase. First is the accumulation. So accumulation is the time period during our working years when we're putting money, depositing money into our savings account or our 401k, TSP, IRA, or whatever it is that you're using to save money into. Most of these accounts are tax deferred unless it's a Roth, and in that case, it's going to be pre-tax dollars. Either way, accumulation phase is when you're putting money into these accounts and trying to just build up as much of it as we can over time. Now, during that period, the average rate of return is the measure that we use to see whether or not it's successful or not. Um, the sequence of those returns, and let's just show you what that looks like, is irrelevant during the accumulation phase. And let me explain what I mean by that. So, two different portfolios. This is one right here on the left hand side of the ledger, and then another on the right hand side of the ledger. And in this sample, we're running a 15-year sample using the same rate of return annually, 14, negative 14, negative 25, 36, 5.78, all the way at the end of the 15-year run, averaging 11.31. Taking that same rate of return sequence, but inverting it, starting 14 at the bottom and 578 at the top. So same numbers, just inverted, same rate of return. So an average of 11.31 over a 15-year period. There's your average rate of return. In this scenario here, it doesn't matter which order you put it in. At the end of the day, you start off with 2 mil. At the end of 15 years, you've got 8.1 million in the account. This is during the savings phase or accumulation phase. Distribution, a little bit different. Okay. So during the distribution phase of the retirement savings journey, we're adding one factor into the equation. That's the distribution or withdrawals, whatever you want to call it. At this stage of the game, these two people have retired. So their earned income has ceased or stopped uh, receiving earned income, and they now have to start using money out of the portfolio to live. In this sample here, we're pulling money out annually on this side of the ledger as well as this side. So this guy's withdrawing and this guy's withdrawing. They're both retired. They're starting off retirement now, okay? But here's the difference. During the distribution phase, or when you start withdrawing because you're not working anymore, in this scenario here, he's starting off 2 years in a negative. This fella here is not. Again, same rates of return over a 15-year period, just in inverse order. Again, sequence of returns. So now that you're starting to take distribution, sequence matters a lot. This guy here retired, but the first couple of years, the stock market's in the red. This one is not. Look at the big difference on what happens over time. Why is that? No different than you having a house that's worth $500,000. Okay? Your house is worth $500,000. The market drops to $350,000. Do you lose money? No, because you haven't sold the house. The drop of $150,000 in value is irrelevant because you didn't sell it. Now, when you retire or during the accumulation phase, that's what's happening. Negative moves in the market is your friend because things are on sale. But once you stop contributing money and you're starting to withdraw, now you're locking in losses. So you start off with $2 million, you take out $200,000, but it drops. The market drops 14.42%. Okay. The following year, in year 13, after a year of the withdrawal and negative move, that $2 million is now worth $1.5 million. Big drop in 1 year. Why? Because not only did the market drop, you also took a withdrawal the following year. Okay? And fast forward to year 12, this one's in jeopardy. This one, not so bad. Why? Same withdrawals, but there's no negative in the beginning. That's why in this sequence here, the sequence of returns matter once distributions begin. So think about that. So if you're retiring, when do you retire? Yeah, you want to retire when the market's up, but you don't get to pick that. It's the days after you retire that counts. So you could go all the way here and have a good run, but the year after you retire, this is what happens to the market. God knows why or what reason, but if that's what happens, this is what it looks like. So how do we avoid having that problem? Well, here's the answer. And it's just one move. What if following a 14.42 loss, the following year, we don't take a withdrawal? It's no different than that house that we owned for $500,000. Value dropped to $350,000. If you didn't sell, you didn't lose, right? Same thing here. $2 million to start. You took out distribution to live. The markets dropped the following year. Instead of taking out the $200,000, which would have locked in your losses, and you ended up with 1.5. You don't take that distribution. Same here. After the 25.95 loss, you don't take a distribution. After the 7.03 loss, you don't take a distribution. After the 4.64, you don't take a distribution. Easy enough to say, but where in the whole world are you going to get that money? You're relying on your savings to do that. Well, that's where an alternative funding source prior to retirement would be helpful. And there's a number of ways to do that. What your solution is different from the next guy. We need to sit down and take a look at everything that you've got, and we'll look at a plan ahead of time. Again, ahead of time. This plan needs to be in place prior to retirement. Otherwise, you're behind the 8 ball. Okay? So alternative funding source is what we're after to solve that problem of sequence of returns risk. 4 characteristics that you must have for whatever alternative funding source you're going to use to fill in those gaps when the market is down the previous year. Okay? So rule number 1 is going to be that it has to be removed from stock market losses. Because if it's not, then you're in the same boat, right? So rule number 1, whatever you're pulling the money from cannot be in a stock market. Rule number 2 is it must be able to gain a productive rate of return. And to me, that's just, at the very least, you want to outpace inflation. Because inflation, if it's at 3.5%, and your money's making 0.5%, well, you're going backwards. That's not helping you any, okay? And God forbid if it's in a stock market. So again, rule number one, can be in a stock market. Rule number two is it has to have a fairly decent rate of return, not your savings account. It has to outpace inflation. Number three, it has to be in place and funded well ahead of or prior to your retirement. Well, how do you do that? Well, either you do that right before retirement, kind of last minute, or if you're doing this a few years ahead of retirement, you can start that plan and we can figure out what that is when we sit down and talk. But you need to have a funding source that's not in the market, that has a decent rate of return, but it has to be placed. It has to be funded before you actually retire. Now, if you're already retired and this is last minute, better late than never. But again, if you're watching this before your retirement date is set, earlier the better. Okay, so ASAP. Number four, it must, or loosely, it should be accessible to you without any penalties. Okay, so if you grab the money out of whatever it is, hopefully there's no penalties there, because if it is, then you're taking a haircut on how much you can spend that year. Secondly, you want it to be tax-free, if at all possible. Again, another haircut if it's not. If Uncle Sam takes a cut of whatever it is that you were drawing for that year in place of that as an alternative retirement funding source, then that kind of puts you a little bit behind the eight ball. But again, still beats taking a 33% market hit and then locking it in. So those are the four rules that you should have on whatever alternative funding source you're going to use to fill in those, in that sample, the 4 years out of the 15 to give your portfolio time to recover. And that's just a review. Number one, must be removed from stock market risk, must be able to gain productive rate of return, must be well funded prior to, and should be accessible, penalty free, preferably tax free. Right? So what is the solution? The solution is going to be different for everybody. Your situation will be different from your next door neighbors, your uncles, or your aunts. So best thing to do is just schedule a time with us, and we'll, based on what your particular situation is, we'll have to find a solution that fits you the best. Okay, because not everybody will have the same solution. Thanks for your time. Roland Jaramillo, Safe Financial, 504-338-3668. There's a QR code if you prefer to do it that way. And hopefully this opens up some eyes, and see you next time.